There's this moment that hits a lot of people sometime in their 30s, usually when nothing dramatic is happening, no crisis, no emergency. You're just going about your day, paying bills, answering emails, living life, and then it clicks. Not in a panic way, more like a quiet realization. You're not experimenting anymore. You're building something, whether you mean to or not. Most people don't notice it right away because life feels busy enough to distract you. Work has expectations now. Relationships carry weight. Money isn't a constant emergency like it used to be, but it's not exactly relaxed either. You're earning more than you did in your 20s, yet somehow the gap between what comes in and what stays feels thin. And you tell yourself that's normal. Everyone feels this way, right? I've spent way too much time thinking about money. Not just numbers and budgets, but the psychology behind it, why certain decades feel heavier than others, why people with similar incomes end up with completely different lives. And what I've noticed is that your 30s are where things quietly solidify. Habits harden, expectations settle in, decisions stop feeling temporary. What's strange is that no one really frames it that way. Your 30s are marketed as this flexible, figure it out decade, plenty of time, plenty of room to adjust later. And technically, that's true. But emotionally and financially, patterns start forming now that are harder to undo than most people expect. The uncomfortable part is that nothing forces you to pay attention. There's no deadline. No alarm that goes off to tell you this is the decade where direction matters more than intensity. So most people drift not because they're careless, but because they're tired, because they're busy, because thinking too far ahead feels abstract when today already demands so much. But here's the shift I want to offer you. The decisions you make in your 30s don't just affect your bank account. They decide how your 50s feel. Whether money feels supportive or restrictive, whether work feels optional or mandatory, whether stress shows up as a background hum or a constant companion. This isn't about fear, it's about awareness. Once you see how quietly powerful this decade is, you stop treating money like something you'll deal with later. You start seeing it as something that's already shaping your future, one small decision at a time. One of the strangest things about your 30s is how little feedback you get from your decisions. You can be doing something incredibly smart financially and feel like nothing is happening. Or you can be making choices that quietly hurt you long term and life still feels fine. That's what makes this decade deceptive. There's no immediate reward for discipline and no immediate punishment for neglect. Think about compounding for a second, not just money compounding, but habits, identity, momentum. In your 20s, almost nothing has time to compound yet. You're still experimenting, still resetting. In your 40s and 50s, the results are obvious. You can see them in bank accounts, stress levels, and flexibility. But your 30s sit right in the middle. This is the invisible phase, the part where the foundation is being poured underground. You don't see it, but it's setting the shape of everything above it. Picture two people. Same age, same income, same city. One starts saving and investing a little in their early 30 seconds. Nothing flashy, no extreme sacrifices, just consistency. The other tells themselves they'll catch up later when things calm down. 10 years pass. The difference between them isn't just numbers, it's posture. One moves through life like money is quietly working in the background. The other feels a constant sense of pressure, like time suddenly sped up. That's the part most people miss. The real advantage of your 30s isn't how much you make. It's time paired with stability. You're finally earning, but you still have decades ahead. That combination doesn't come back once it's gone. And because progress is slow at first, it's easy to underestimate how powerful this window actually is. I used to think progress was supposed to feel exciting, like there would be a moment where it clicked and everything felt different. But most of the time, it feels boring, quiet, almost underwhelming. And that's usually when people stop. They assume it's not working. They assume they're behind. They assume it doesn't matter yet. Here's the truth. Your 30s are when direction matters more than speed. Small decisions, repeated consistently, lock you into a trajectory that becomes very hard to change later. Not impossible, but harder. And this matters for your 50s because by then, compounding is no longer invisible. It's either working for you or you're finally feeling the weight of not starting earlier. Once you understand that, your 30s stop feeling like a race you're losing. They start feeling like a quiet opportunity most people don't realize they're standing inside. Most people don't get into trouble with money because of one big, dramatic mistake. It's rarely some explosive decision. It's usually a series of upgrades that feel reasonable in isolation. A slightly nicer apartment. A car that's just a little more comfortable. A few subscriptions you barely notice. Individually, none of it feels reckless. Together, it slowly tightens your financial breathing room. Lifestyle creep is sneaky because it disguises itself as progress. You make more money, so your life looks better. That makes sense, right? And to a degree, it does. The problem is when every raise gets absorbed before it even hits your account, you don't feel richer. You just feel more committed, more locked in, more dependent on your current income, continuing exactly as it is. This usually starts in your 30s because that's when life begins rewarding stability. You're not living off instant noodles anymore. You want comfort, predictability, a sense that all your effort is paying off. And honestly, you deserve some of that. The danger isn't enjoying your money, it's letting your baseline quietly rise without intention. I've watched this happen over and over. Someone gets a raise and upgrades their rent. Then they upgrade their car. Then their lifestyle. Then suddenly, even with a higher income, they feel just as tight as before. And when an unexpected expense shows up, it still feels stressful. That's usually the first sign that lifestyle creep has already done its work. What makes this especially dangerous for your 50 seconds is that it locks in high monthly obligations. The higher your fixed costs, the harder it is to slow down later. The harder it is to walk away from a job you hate. The harder it is to take care of your health, your time, or your family without money stress lurking in the background. The emotional side of this is important too. Lifestyle creep often comes with a quiet narrative. I earned this. I deserve this. And most of the time, that's true. But if every reward becomes permanent, you remove your ability to choose later. You trade future flexibility for present comfort without realizing it. The goal isn't deprivation, it's control. It's deciding which upgrades actually improve your life and which ones just inflate it. A simple shift that helps is treating raises as partially invisible. Let some of that increase go directly toward future you before your lifestyle ever touches it. If you get this right in your 30s, your 50s feel lighter. Fewer obligations, more options, less pressure. Lifestyle creep doesn't announce itself, but once you see it, you can stop it from quietly deciding your future for you. By the time you hit your 30s, work starts to feel different. It's no longer just something you do to survive. It's something that shapes your identity, your schedule, your energy. You're not brand new anymore, but you're not at the finish line either. And this is where a subtle tension shows up between momentum and comfort. Comfort isn't a bad thing. It's stability. It's knowing how to do your job well. It's predictable paychecks and familiar routines. The problem is when comfort slowly replaces growth without you noticing. When you stop asking uncomfortable questions because everything feels good enough. That's usually when earning potential quietly plateaus. In your 30s, the gap between what you can earn and what you are earning often starts to widen, not because opportunities disappear, but because risk starts to feel more expensive. You might have a mortgage now, or a family, or responsibilities that don't leave much room for uncertainty. So staying put feels responsible, logical, safe. I've seen people stay in roles they outgrew years ago because leaving felt disruptive. And on paper, it made sense. The pay was fine, the benefits were decent, but 10 years later, the cost became clear. Not just financially, but emotionally. The feeling of being stuck is heavier than the fear of moving when you're younger. Career momentum in your 30s doesn't mean constant job hopping or chasing titles. It means deliberately increasing your value, learning skills that compound, taking on projects that stretch you, making yourself harder to replace. These moves don't always pay off immediately, but they raise your ceiling in a way that comfort never does. What matters for your 50s is optionality. Can you slow down if you want to? Can you pivot? Can you say no? Those freedoms are built earlier than most people realize. If your income growth stalls in your 30 seconds, catching up later requires much more effort, often at a time when energy and tolerance for stress are lower. There's also a psychological piece here. When you keep growing, even incrementally, work feels lighter. You feel capable, relevant, in control. When you stop, anxiety tends to creep in quietly. You start worrying about being replaced, falling behind, or missing your window. The takeaway isn't to chase burnout, it's to stay intentional. Ask yourself once a year whether your career is still moving forward or just moving sideways. Small adjustments now can mean the difference between feeling trapped by work in your 50s or feeling like you're choosing it. Comfort feels good today. Momentum protects you tomorrow. In your 30s, you still get to choose which one you're prioritizing. Debt hits differently in your 30s. In your 20s, it often feels temporary. Student loans, credit cards, maybe a car payment. You assume future income will handle it, and sometimes it does. But this decade is where debt either gets cleared or quietly becomes a long-term companion. What makes the 30s such a critical window is income stability. You're usually earning enough to make real progress, but expenses haven't peaked yet. This is the moment when eliminating high-interest debt is actually realistic, and yet, it's also when people delay it the most. Part of that is emotional. Paying off debt isn't exciting. It doesn't come with status. No one sees it. There's always something more appealing to spend money on. And because life feels manageable, the urgency just isn't there. You tell yourself you'll deal with it later. The problem is that later arrives faster than expected. Carrying debt into your 40s and 50s changes how money feels. Payments become permanent fixtures. Interest quietly drains energy from every paycheck, and the stress compounds alongside the balance. I've talked to people who make great money but still feel trapped because of debt they normalized years ago. It limits choices, it keeps work mandatory, it adds weight to decisions that should feel simple, and by that point, clearing it requires either extreme discipline or uncomfortable lifestyle changes. There's also a mental load that comes with debt that people underestimate. Even when you're not actively thinking about it, it's there, in the background, influencing how safe you feel, how much risk you're willing to take, how confident you are about the future. Your 30s offer a rare overlap of capacity and time. You still have decades ahead, but you're strong enough financially to do something about it now. Clearing high-interest debt here doesn't just free up cash. It frees up emotional bandwidth. It creates room to breathe. This doesn't mean rushing or punishing yourself. It means prioritizing, choosing to see debt reduction as a form of self-respect for your future. Every balance you eliminate is one less obligation your 50-year-old self has to carry. The people who feel calm later aren't always the ones who earned the most. They're often the ones who removed friction early. Debt is friction, and your 30 seconds are the best chance you have to remove it without panic. If you use this decade to clean up what's been dragging behind you, the decades that follow feel dramatically lighter. Not because life gets easier, but because you're no longer fighting against choices you made years earlier. A lot of people think investing is complicated. Charts, percentages, funds, timing the market, it can feel like a giant math problem you're never going to solve. But honestly, that's only part of it. The real power of investing in your 30s isn't the math. It's identity. It's the way it quietly shapes who you see yourself as and how you behave with money. When you start investing in your 30s, you're doing more than putting cash into an account. You're telling yourself, I am the kind of person who plans for tomorrow. That statement may sound small, but it has huge compounding effects over time. It affects how you approach spending, saving, and even career choices. It creates habits that your future self will thank you for every single day. I've noticed that people who start late often struggle with guilt and fear. They feel like they missed the boat. They obsess over returns and timing, when really, the goal is to become someone who consistently invests. Consistency beats perfection every time, especially in your 30s. Small, regular investments, repeated over years, create a psychological comfort that money alone can't buy. Let me give you an example. I know someone who started investing just $200 a month in their early 30s. Not huge, not life-changing at the time. 10 years later, those contributions, paired with compounding, became a sum they couldn't imagine having in their 20s. More importantly, it gave them confidence. They felt like money was working quietly in the background. They could take calculated risks in their career, negotiate a salary without panic, and even experiment with side projects, knowing that some security already existed. Investing isn't about chasing gains or comparing yourself to other people. It's about building a pattern of action. The identity of I invest, therefore I'm prepared becomes a habit. It's invisible at first, but by the time you hit your 50s, it's part of your financial DNA. You stop feeling like money is controlling you, and you start feeling like you're guiding it. So if you haven't started, or if you've hesitated thinking it's too late, remember, the numbers matter less than the habit and the identity you cultivate. Investing consistently in your 30 seconds is like planting trees you'll enjoy in your 50s. The shade doesn't appear overnight. The growth is slow, quiet, but if you start now, you'll eventually wonder why you ever hesitated. It might sound strange, but one of the biggest financial influences in your 30s isn't a stock market trend, a budget, or a side hustle. It's the people around you. Friends, partners, coworkers, they all shape your habits, your spending, and your expectations, whether you notice it or not. Think about it. If most of the people you spend time with are constantly upgrading lifestyles, chasing convenience, or stressing over money, that behavior is contagious. You might not consciously adopt it, but it subtly nudges your own decisions. The same goes the other way. If your circle respects frugality, invests wisely, and talks openly about financial choices, that's also contagious. I've had moments where I realized I was silently letting other people's financial choices influence mine, not in a dramatic, obvious way, just small things, subscriptions I didn't need, eating out more than I wanted, feeling pressured to keep up with the standard without even thinking about it. It's subtle, but over years, it can dramatically shift your trajectory. The tricky part is that your 30s are also socially busy. Relationships are more serious, work networks are more ingrained. You can't just cut people out, and you shouldn't. But you can be aware. Awareness is surprisingly powerful. You can notice patterns without judgment, reflect on how they affect your decisions, and make small adjustments to protect your future self. Sometimes it's as simple as setting boundaries, choosing to spend less time in situations where you're tempted to overspend, or having honest conversations with friends or partners about money, or even just mentally acknowledging the influence before it subtly seeps into your habits. That quiet acknowledgement changes how you act without creating tension. Your 30s are when social patterns start locking in. Friends' habits, professional norms, and even casual conversations about money begin to shape your long-term trajectory. Pay attention. Invest in relationships that reinforce the behaviors you want for yourself. Step back from influences that create unnecessary financial pressure, because by the time you reach your 50s, these patterns compound just like habits or investments. The people you surround yourself with in your 30s can either make life feel lighter and more flexible, or quietly limit your options in ways that only become obvious years later. Choosing wisely now is an invisible but extremely powerful move. When you step back and look at all of this together, it starts to feel less like a lecture and more like a roadmap you might have wished someone handed you 10 years ago. Your 30s aren't about drama or sudden breakthroughs. They're about accumulation in the quietest sense, small, repeated decisions, habits that compound, and choices that shape decades of life you haven't even reached yet. By now, you've seen how it all connects. The invisible compounding of habits and money, the subtle creep of lifestyle upgrades, the ceiling comfort can place on your career, the debts that quietly follow you, the mindset shift of investing consistently, and the people who influence your financial psychology. Each one, on its own, might seem minor, but together they form a trajectory. One that your 50s will either thank you for or quietly remind you of missed opportunities. And that's the thing about these decisions. They aren't flashy. There's no viral moment, no instant satisfaction. You don't get a notification on your phone telling you, "Congrats, you're building financial freedom." The reward is delayed, often invisible, and that's why it trips people up. It's so easy to assume, "I'll catch up later," or "I'll start over next year," or "it's fine for now." But your future self, the person in their 50 seconds who deserves flexibility, calm, and control, depends on the choices you make right now, quietly and deliberately. I want you to imagine your 50-year-old self for a moment. Picture what life feels like then if you make intentional choices today. Less financial stress, more options, work you actually choose, and a real sense of freedom. Now picture what it feels like if you ignore this decade. The same pressures, just magnified, and suddenly the time to fix it feels like it's slipping away. That contrast alone is enough to motivate anyone who's honest with themselves. Here's the good news. You still have time. Your 30s are a gift. You don't have to be perfect, you don't have to earn a fortune overnight, and you don't have to completely overhaul your life in one day. Small, consistent actions, saving, investing, being mindful of lifestyle creep, staying intentional in your career, eliminating debt, and surrounding yourself with positive financial influences can transform your entire trajectory. They quietly stack into something meaningful over the years. So here's my quiet challenge to you. Choose one small thing today that nudges your future self in the right direction. Maybe it's automating a savings account. Maybe it's saying no to an unnecessary upgrade. Maybe it's finally opening that investment account. Whatever it is, make it tangible and do it today. Because the person you are now is literally shaping the decades ahead. And if this video made you stop and think, pause, or reconsider even one decision you've been postponing, do yourself a favor. Share it with someone else in their 30 seconds who might need that same nudge. Conversations like these, simple awareness, are often the spark that starts compounding habits. Just like money, your 30s are quietly powerful. Treat them that way. Start now. Your 50-year-old self is already waiting, silently grateful for the moves you make today.